Okay, let's get settled in. I think I could start. Is anyone from CRA here? Do they have to start something for the AI stuff? Okay, this might not get captured by the AI tool, and if it is, it's capturing this, which is kind of creepy also. Thanks so much for coming today. It's great to be here back at Identiverse. Before we get started, let me get the lay of the land as to who's in the room. How many of you attended the master class yesterday? Okay. How many of you are new to Passkeys and FIDO? Awesome. And how many of you are somewhere in between? Fantastic. So that's great. And so there's a lot of passkey content this week, and while we're very excited about the trajectory, what's happening with passkeys in the marketplace, there's a lot to be learned, and we're just at the tip of where we're starting with passkeys being deployed at scale. So that's me. I am Andrew Shikiar. I serve as FIDO's Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer. Again, really happy to talk to you today about passkeys and passwordless and the state of things in our market. So for those of you who don't know, this has been FIDO's vision since 2013. In fact, we've been showing this exact same slide for over 10 years now. And our goal has been basically to build a better authentication mousetrap. All right, something simpler and stronger than both passwords and legacy forms of multi-factor authentication. And we're doing this by creating open standards for single gesture, user-friendly, asymmetric public key cryptography. That's what FIDO's been doing for over 10 years now. And this is representative of who we are. Right? We have over 300 members worldwide. Those of you who've seen me talk have heard me say this before, but really, this set of impressive icons on the screen of logos, this is our board of directors. It's over 40 companies that really represent the mix of members we have throughout FIDO Alliance. And what's important here is that it's the right blend of opinions and experts to make this happen. All right, so we have the companies who are shipping platforms and devices at massive scale. We have experts in identity, security, and authentication. And last but not least, we have the companies whose businesses are dependent upon our success. Right, companies who need to deliver high assurance services to billions of users worldwide on a daily basis. And so it's that blend of requirements and experts that really help build the standards and the guidelines that are really driving adoption and success with passkeys and FIDO authentication. But really, passkeys are the response to a fundamentally flawed foundation. Right? So the problem statement has been and remains passwords. Right? Passwords are the problem. We've known this for some time. Right? Passwords have been around since before the internet existed, and our answer to the problem, collectively, has been, yes, we know it's a problem. How do we make them suck less? How do we add layers on top of this? And so the answer has been to layer on added factors. And to be clear, any factor on top of a password is better than a password alone. Right? And this is a necessary step that we've taken. But ultimately, as technology has progressed and attackers have progressed, AI has progressed, more and more we're finding this to be simply insufficient. Right? So your average social engineering attack can bypass your typical MFA implementation. So the answer is not layers. The answer is to reframe the way that we think about user authentication. You'll hear me say this multiple times today. We got to rethink the way we think about user authentication. And so passkeys are at the core of this. Right? So what is a passkey? Right? So a passkey is basically any passwordless FIDO credential. A passkey can be synced, meaning that the FIDO private key is securely synced across the device or passkey provider cloud, or it can be device-bound, typically on a security key or a native app. Right? So passkeys are a term we basically layered on top of FIDO authentication. Again, FIDO authentication is not 2 years old. FIDO authentication is over 10 years old. So it's a proven foundation, but what we've introduced is a new way to implement this along with common naming, common branding, and common user flows to start driving familiarity with the masses for FIDO authentication. And what passkeys really represent is a fundamental pivot. Right? Again, reframing the way we think about things. Think about, what if we could replace the old model of password plus something else with a single factor that's better, easier to use, meets the same purpose. Right? So what if we could do that, understanding that the primary threat today, the primary threat is phishing and social engineering. Right? AI is adding to that. I'm not saying AI is not a threat. AI is making this worse by orders of magnitude. But phishing is the threat. If that is a threat, a single passkey, a single phishing-resistant authenticator is better, that's readily available, is a better solution than two forms that are both easily phished. So for those of you who have been familiar with FIDO, you know this has been our security model since day one. Again, the same slide more or less we've been showing for over 10 years now. This is basically public key cryptography at work. And what FIDO has done is take the risk away from centralized authentication where the password sits on the server to a more decentralized model where all the authentication and verification is done locally. So instead of a password and knowledge-based credential, we have a unique key pair with the private key sitting on the device, the public key sitting on the server. Now, this has been the gold standard from a security standpoint for many, many years. But what we found a couple of years ago was that this wasn't the right model to reach the masses. Right? FIDO's objective is to reduce reliance on password for the world, the whole world, for everyone on the planet. And so the challenge with this model is that it forces you to enroll every device, an authenticator for every device for every service, which is counterintuitive to consumers who just want to be able to have an easy password manager-like experience, if you will, but without the risk of passwords. And so what Passkeys introduced was the ability to actually now sync that private key. So in addition to having the option of having the private key stored safely on the device, it can now be securely synchronized across a passkey provider cloud such that that credential is readily available across all your devices, so for easier sign-in, more intuitive experience, and also easier recovery. So we introduced this concept just over 2 years ago. And we've seen fantastic adoption, right? So over 13 billion accounts can have the option of enrolling a passkey. And in reality, you know, passkeys, the ability to synchronize your key wasn't readily available across operating systems until last January. So really, it's only been 16, 17 months that we've seen this adoption. And a lot of it comes down to the bottom two figures we see, which is a built-in support for FIDO authentication on virtually every modern computing device we have today. So it's not just huge numbers of potential enrollees, it's also the sites that are supporting them. Right? Over 20% of the world's top 100 sites support them, and 12% of the top 200 sites. Our data shows that over 50% of consumers have enrolled the Passkeys. So that's, to me, fantastic adoption for less than a year and a half to go from 0 to half the world's users having used a passkey in short time. And the momentum continues to grow. So just the past few months, we've seen these companies and many, many more support passkeys. So Microsoft recently announced broader support within the platform and also for Microsoft account. PlayStation supported it, Target, BMW, Mini. You see all the names here. You know, the beat goes on. And we're really happy to see this type of momentum across sectors and across industries. The bottom right one, you know, my login is the state of Michigan. We're seeing a lot of government adoption of passkeys as well for e-citizen services and such and things like that. And one reason why we're seeing such adoption is that we're seeing proven success. Right, so time and time again, you see companies like TikTok, Mercari, Google, Air New Zealand deploying passkeys with great success. And generally for consumer implementations, the two metrics people are looking at is how quickly can someone sign in and how successfully can they sign in. Right? And both two of those metrics are, you know, going up or down depending what the goal is. They're improving with passkeys. And so as a result, we see companies expanding their initial deployments and then more and more companies learning from these companies and doing their own implementations, which again is how we got from 0 to 13 billion potential accounts in less than a year and a half. So all in all, you know, feel great about the trajectory. There's 16. This is another very important data point. At Identiverse this year, there's 16 different talks with passkey in the title. Right, so that's really exciting. If you walk around the hallways at Expo Hall, you see a lot of companies with passkey solutions. So make no mistake, this is like passkeys are here. There's an inevitability about passkeys being adopted and deployed at scale. And we're in the earlier stages of great success and great progress. But I want to talk a little bit about some myths that we hear. Right? We've heard these for a couple of years, a lot of concerns, a lot of well-founded concerns. I want to debunk some of these myths, if I may. So one of them is that regulators don't like passkeys. Right? And I've heard this, you know, quite a bit. And this is, you know, the top of the list is something we're focused on correcting over the past couple of years. And what I would say is that this comes back to the same idea of reframing the way that we think about authentication, we being the collective we. The fact of the matter is that every piece of legislation, every major standard, every regulation that's on the books today was developed at a time where the only frame of reference was one of passwords. So it goes back to my earlier slide, which was like passwords are necessary. The idea of the focus has been on making passwords be less risky by adding on layers. But never has there been a true password alternative like passkeys. So now we're starting to see regulators and related bodies issue guidance aligned with understanding the benefit of sync passkeys. Now I know that NIST is not a regulator, but a lot of regulators follow NIST's lead. And we were very happy when NIST came out with supplemental guidance to their digital identity guidelines that specifically called out the benefits of sync passkeys. And noted that when you implement according to their guidance, that they meet AL2. It's an unfishable alternative for user authentication. And we hear from companies all over the world that they're looking for NIST's guidance on where to sync passkeys fit in. So we think this is a very meaningful milestone, which will further accelerate global adoption of passkeys, especially in regulated industry. Related to this one is something I hear that banks won't deploy passkeys. Right? Banks will never go for this. We don't like the key synchronization. Now, to be fair, this is a real challenge. Right? We have a very active community of financial services companies in the Alliance who have stated well-known concerns about some of these implications. But while they're struggling with this, by and large, I'd say there's an appetite, a willingness, and a commitment to figure out how to make passkeys work today and in the future as the support broadens for higher assurance use cases. And even today, we're seeing banks roll out passkeys. So Abanca is a bank in Spain that's rolled out passkeys to over 100,000 customers with great success. I'm aware of other banks in other parts of the world also rolling out passkeys, and I'm confident that we'll start seeing some banks in the US implement passkeys in the months to come between now and over the next year or so. Another myth, passkeys are just for sign-in. So we were super excited to disavow this the other week when Visa and MasterCard both demonstrated that passkeys aren't just for sign-in. They can also be for payment. And so Visa, I don't know how many of you saw this, the Visa Payment Passkey service is a service for merchants, Visa merchants, that allows them to use passkeys to approve payments. Right? This is powered by a Visa FIDO 2 server that they built, and it brings the benefit of passkey ubiquity to payments. So anyone now can authorize a payment with a passkey as opposed to going through some awkward second steps and second factors or juggling devices to make that happen. And last but not least, this is always my favorite, passkeys create vendor lock-in. So 2 years ago, we announced passkeys just before Identiverse, and we came to Identiverse and walked around the halls outside Denver, and there was a lot of consternation, a lot of concern around passkeys. The number one thing we heard was, well, I'm not going to default all of my authentication to Google and Apple and Microsoft. And that's a valid concern. But that being said, we've always envisioned and anticipated a robust, mature, competitive ecosystem for passkeys. And the market has fully borne that out. So yes, you can use operating system providers to manage your passkeys, but companies like 1Password and Dashlane and Bitwarden have all gotten involved in FIDO Alliance and frankly have been a transformative force inside the Alliance as we've contemplated how to allow multiple passkey providers to take part in the ecosystem and thrive in the ecosystem. In addition, of course, you can use passkeys on security keys and device-bound apps. Right? So there's a lot of options on where you can use passkeys. There's options in passkey providers, and this will only grow over time. So this was, there's never the intent to have any sort of vendor lock-in, and I'm so glad to see the ecosystem starting to fully mature and blossom to support multiple vendors. On that note, we're also seeing a lot of activity with credential portability. So currently, of course, all credential providers allow you to import and export passwords. This will be no different with passkeys, only more secure. All right, so we've actually just published a working draft of a credential exchange protocol, credential exchange format. That's published on our website, our spec page, and open for your inputs. So if you're interested in learning more about that, come see us after I finish talking. I'll point you in the direction of that so you can look at the specs and give your feedback to those specs. One other thing to note is that we're deeply committed to the Certified Passkey Provider program. So this is a program that will look at added passkey providers and those that are taking the requisite steps to protect their sync clouds and the credentials therein and recognize them accordingly. So that in the near future, you'll be able to understand who's a certified passkey provider and who doesn't yet have those credentials. So coming back to some of our core work efforts inside of FIDO Alliance, just a couple hours ago, we introduced the UX guidelines for 2024. We have a very close focus on usability. As in fact, usability has been one of the top drivers for passkey adoption. When you're looking at consumers, the number one things we often hear is, again, going back to those KPIs, how quickly can someone get online and what's their success rate? And that's very much about usability with the added benefits of security and unphishability built in. And so it's paramount that we get usability right. And so we've invested heavily in this program. As you may have seen from the session earlier today, we have guidelines that are freely available for any product designer, product lead to implement, to use, including a full Figma file, UI kit, to make your own passkey implementations successful. Another important program that we've had inside of FIDO Alliance since 2016 is the FIDO Certified program. All right, so standards by themselves are great, but certification really makes them actionable. Certification unlocks the power of open standards. It gives confidence in interoperability, gives confidence in compliance. So since 2016, we've launched this program. We've had over 1,000 FIDO certified products for core FIDO user authentication. So servers, authenticators, SDKs, and things like that. More and more, we're seeing FIDO certified as a required element of RFPs. So for those of you who have FIDO certified in your RFPs, thank you. And we have a very active FIDO vendor ecosystem that's ready to fulfill that demand. We've also launched a biometric component certification program. So this is something we provided to the industry a couple years ago to allow people to understand the performance of individual biometric components. All right, so how false accept rate, false reject rate, things like that, how well do these components perform? So we're talking about cameras, sensors, tools like that. And last but not least, today, we're very excited to announce our face verification certification program. This is something that matches our commitment to possession-based authentication with possession-based account enrollment to ensure that when someone is doing a remote identity proof activity, that they're doing so in a way, the vendor is doing so in a way that is high performance and fully secure. So we announced that program today. I'll come back to that in a second. But all in all, as we're looking at the broader account lifecycle, FIDO is addressing all elements. So FIDO authentication in the middle, of course, is a key component to make sure that the sign-ins are fully secure, but also really starts at account enrollment. Right? So getting rid of knowledge-based credentialing at account creation, and then when it comes time to recover, of course, the strength of recovery is only as strong as the other two elements. So you're basically reproofing. Ideally, you're reproofing not against a knowledge-based credential, but a possession-based proofed credential to help with secure account recovery. So I breezed through that pretty quickly. I want to bring on stage special guest, AJ Amlani from iProve, to talk a little bit about the announcement we made today with the face verification program. AJ.
Thank you so much.
Okay, a couple questions for you. First,
Yes.
Introduce yourself, please.
Nice to meet everybody. AJ Amlani. I'm with iProve. I'm head of the Americas.
Okay, cheers.
Don't need a clap. Please don't.
So this program we announced today, why is this important for the industry, and why now in particular?
Sure. So what we're finding right now is that there's a huge soaring demand for biometric capabilities as it relates to remote ID verification. And so as vendors and partners out there in the market are trying to figure out which ones are the best ones, they look to third-party sources to be able to validate the testing and see who comes out on top. Unfortunately, there's just a huge shortage of third-party people who have actually gone out and been able to test these different types of capabilities, especially as they relate to detecting against deepfake attacks. Deepfake attacks are obviously one of the biggest concerns that people have right now. Those tools have been democratized to be able to be in the hands of most of even the least sophisticated actors now today have deepfake capabilities, and that presents a huge vulnerability. Whereas with FIDO, they've done an amazing job of being able to get rid of passwords, but protecting the front end of the enrollment, and then also the rebinding of those particular tokens is a very important component towards the safety and security of the system.
Super. So how's this actually accomplished? All right. So how do we snuff out deepfakes, and how do we identify them? And then how's the program looking at this?
Sure. So there's a variety of different ways that people are going at this problem. How many people in the room have ever used like a CAPTCHA in one of those really sophisticated tools? that basically try to get you to find parking meters and then all of a sudden different aspects, right? So part of this is actually assessing, first off, like, is this a real human? Is this a real person at the time? So making sure that you actually have a real person, it's the right person, and they're there at that exact time are three of the major components of making sure that you can protect yourself against these different types of deepfake attacks. And so the iProof solution uses lighting from a screen of a phone or a desktop to reflect against your face and back into the camera real time while you're doing a biometric match. So for consumer, it introduces no friction. It's a passive solution while you're doing a biometric match, just as if you're doing a Face ID on a normal Apple device. But it introduces an added layer of protection to make sure that the person itself is actually there at that time. And we've gone through an insanely rigorous testing capability with FIDO to make sure that we are the only certified solution in the market at this point in time, even though it is a globally available certification program.
So the evil Andres we saw in Andre's opening keynote, those would not be a match for the tools that are going to be certified by this program.
Correct. If you think about most tools in the program, most tools that are available in the market, they actually take a look at the video or the photo after it's already been collected and assess pixelated changes or blurs or different things like that. They also assess motion. So one of the most important components of this is making sure that you can protect yourself against bias. Bias is a massive issue right now within the biometrics world, and making sure that you define bias not just as skin tone, which we do for sure, and we run a lot of tests to make sure that we are not representing any bias in our training databases for our solutions, but also for cognitive capabilities so that you can pass those crazy CAPTCHAs. I just got served up with a C plane versus a normal plane, which of course is, even on a socioeconomic status level, is a very difficult one to pass. But socioeconomic is another one. Age, gender. So all of these different elements of bias, most people think of skin tone, but there's multiple different levels of bias that you need to look at.
Okay, super. Thank you so much. Why don't you grab a seat? We're going to take some questions in a second. So just to wrap up here, thanks, AJ. So coming back to the broader picture here and our overall guidance for you, again, coming back to that reframing narrative, or as you think about your authentication, you think about your identity strategies, stop checking a box for MFA and start thinking about phishing resistance rather than factors. All right, so a sync passkey is always better than a password alone. If you're using password plus SMS OTP, passkeys are definitely better than what you're doing today. More efficient, more secure, more cost-effective across the board. And phishing-resistant authentication, however, is only as good as your account enrollment and recovery practices. Right? So let's bolster that with certifiable ID proofing, ID verification best practices. But ultimately, we also understand that everyone's business is different. I've had the opportunity just in 2 days to talk to several companies who are rolling out passkeys. Every use case is different, but also every use case has similarities. But ultimately, it comes down to you to think about what are your business requirements. Right? Where does sync passkeys work? Where might they fall short? Where do I need to use device-bound passkeys? Where does ID proofing come in? So these are all things to think about as you roll out your authentication plans and your identity plans. And what FIDO is going to do, this is our commitment to you, our commitment to the industry. We're laser focused on making passkeys inevitable. Right? We'll stand behind this. We're making this happen. We're investing at enablement resources and scale. So the UX work that we're doing, the design guidelines that we have, these are incredibly valuable resources that we're making freely available and will only be expanded over time. And last but not least, we're filling gaps to solve insecurities with onboarding by de-risking account enrollment, using possession-based account recovery, and account creation. So with that, thanks so much. I think we have time for a couple of questions for either AJ or I. Hands, please. Any questions? Those hands are fine as well. Are there any questions? Yes. Oh, we don't have any mics? Oh, Megan, do you mind running?
Megan's going to run.
Megan's going to run. We have time for one question, depending on... Also happy to take questions at the podium afterwards.
One of the challenges that we are always facing with applying FIDO factors, FIDO 2 factors, is with SCIFs. We have projects where there are a lot of people in SCIFs and they are not able to use devices or any kind of keys, in their as a second factor. do you see the FIDO 2 Alliance moving towards a cloud-based a factor, or pushing vendors to create like a cloud-based second factor that can be that is FIDO compliant and can be used in SCIFs?
So generally, all the FIDO factors are going to be local possession, all possession-based verification factors. So I don't see us moving to a cloud-based factor anytime. Now, people layer on signals on top of your FIDO authentication signals, right? Ultimately, this comes out going back to the point I had before about understanding your business, contemplating your business requirements. People might do added signaling on top of the FIDO signal. That might include added risk signals or cloud-based signals or passive biometrics. There's other things people certainly can do on top of the FIDO message. What's sitting next to you is David Turner, our technical director.
I already asked him.
So I'd encourage post-talk dialogue there as well. Any other questions? Quickly, yes.
Are there any plans to try and expand the use of signals? I noticed that some of the signals that we get from the mobile app are far broader than what we get from security.
So the question is there any plan to expand the use of signals? Again, I think the signaling activity is something that can be beyond the scope of the FIDO specs. That's certainly contemplated in the way people roll this out. Okay, thank you so much.